Well, today we're focusing on New Zealand in the 1860s, and in particular, how the discovery of gold transformed the country. At that time, gold had created great wealth in North America and Australia, and, naturally, New Zealand was hoping for the same success. People knew there was gold in New Zealand. Some had been found in 1852, leading to a brief gold rush in which people had come from all parts of the world to see if they could dig up any for themselves. But now New Zealand needed experienced gold prospectors, people who knew where to look for the stuff, to find it in other areas. So what the local government started doing in the late 1850s was promising a reward if these prospectors discovered gold anywhere in their province. The man who eventually answered the call was an Australian miner called Gabriel Reid, who came to Otago in May 1861. The story goes that he was walking outside his tent at night when he saw gold shining like stars in a nearby river. It didn't take long for word of his find to spread, and soon thousands were coming to Otago to take part in the gold rush. Who were these people? Well, the men that came were predominantly labourers and tradesmen, and often very young, although some were married and left their families back in the countries they came from. But women did come too, to the towns that suddenly sprang up by the goldfields. They made a living by starting up hotels, simple ones of course, where new arrivals would often stay. And then there were businessmen who knew there was money to be made by setting up services like hardware stores that sold mining and camping equipment, and of course banks where gold could be deposited. In fact, the businessmen often did better than the miners. So, as I mentioned before, where there was a gold field, a town began to grow too. At first, the buildings were constructed in a temporary fashion, just made out of materials such as canvas and timber. But later, once supplies started arriving, it was concrete, so the structures became more permanent. But the fact was, the goldfields were often in very isolated areas, so life was very difficult for these people. The miners were often working at the bottom of deep gorges, so they had to cope with freezing temperatures and also sudden flooding when winter ice melted in the mountains. If this wasn't bad enough, the miners also had to deal with another problem. Because they had to carry everything with them, they had a very poor diet. They mostly drank tea, and the main thing they had to eat was flour, which they cooked in different ways. That's all that was available. Anyway, some miners were lucky, others not. But the gold that was found certainly brought many benefits to the Otago region, and also a couple of problems. First of all, the town of Dunedin was suddenly transformed into the biggest city in New Zealand. Some of the original residents complained about how the value of land was increasing and about the inadequate sanitation. You can imagine how crowded it might have felt with the sudden influx of thousands of immigrants. But, overall, the gold brought many positive changes to the city. There was immense investment and growth in the shipping industry, just what the region needed. Another unexpected benefit of this wealth was that it provided the funds for the first university in the country. As well as this, as the industry developed, there was a great demand for workers of all sorts, but most of all there was a demand for experienced and skilled engineers. They often started their own companies, and many of these companies are still operating today. What we will discover next week is that these companies are still